Rigtig hjertelig velkommen til vores event, som jo er en faglig eftermiddag, der handler om mission-related investeringer, og et goddag til Kenneth og et farvel til Peter, som sidder der. Vi er super glade for, at I er så mange, der er kommet fra både fondsmiljøet, fra investormiljøet og fra en række andre stakeholder-relationer til os i Realdania. Og så er der også en håndfuld journalister, som har taget imod vores invitation, så tak for det. Og i de her coronatider har det jo været sådan virkelig kompliceret de sidste par dage at tage stilling til, hvad vi kunne og hvad vi ikke kunne. Vi er rigtig glade for, at så stor en gruppe er mødt frem, og at vi samtidig er i stand til at streame det her, og at det også får det, der på moderne dansk hedder digitalt efterliv, sådan så dem, der ikke kunne komme, dem, der ikke ville komme på grund af firmapolitikker eller andet, dem, der selv var syge, også har mulighed for at følge med. Så rigtig hjertelig velkommen. Og også welcome to BLOX and to Danish Architecture Center, which is the place where we have this event. This is a part of our, you could say, in earlier term, mission-related investment from our philanthropic way. And we are so happy that the two of you are participating today, flown in from United States, and we have spent some CO2, some money and some efforts to get you here, and we're so happy that you are here, so you can share all your knowledge with us, which we are very, very happy about. So today is about impact investment with our two keynote speakers, Elisabeth McGeveran from McKnight Foundation and Giselle Leung from GIIN, the Global Impact Investment Network. And as I just said, we are so excited that you're here, so happy about it, and thank you so much for spending a lot of time doing that. And I'm switching back to Danish. The most of the afternoon will be in English, but hvorfor gør vi så det her på den her måde? Det gør vi, fordi vi i Realdania, både når vi arbejder med vores filantropi, og når vi arbejder med vores investeringer, forsøger at skabe samfundsnytte. Når vi arbejder med vores filantropi, så arbejder vi jo rigtig meget med faglighed, med data, med formidling, og så er vi rigtig opmærksomme på noget af det, som Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors har været med til at finde ud af, nemlig at den store forskel på en privat virksomhed og en filantropisk virksomhed, er al vores viden, det er open source. Det er det ikke altid hos en privat virksomhed, men al vores viden er open source, så derfor handler det også om at prøve at dele nogle ting fra vores egen rejse, og det handler om, at vi selv bliver klogere, men også dele viden, så andre bliver klogere på den måde. Og når vi arbejder filantropisk, for eksempel med indeklima i folkeskolen, så handler det om at bruge data til at skifte et mindset, for nogle andre mennesker til at gøre noget på en anden måde. På samme måde handler det også om, når vi arbejder med vores investeringer i større og større omfang, og det er det, vi vil komme med en række eksempler på i eftermiddag. Og på vej til det er det jo så også et goddag og farvel, som jeg lige sagde, et farvel til Peter og et goddag til Kenneth, og det vender jeg også en lille smule tilbage til allersidst. Og så, nogen synes jo, højdepunktet i dag er foredragen om impact investment, andre synes højdepunktet er et glas vin og lidt eftersnak bagefter. Nogen synes måske, at de to ligeværdige højdepunkter, men begge dele er i hvert fald muligt. Når vi så vælger at ville snakke impact investment, de fleste af jer ved her i salen, at vi er en forening, vi er ikke en fond, men vi minder om en fond, men vi er en forening med ca. 165.000 medlemmer. Og når vi arbejder filantropisk, så har vi en filantropistrategi, der via 6 mål sætter nogle rammer og nogle visioner for det, vi skal opnå med vores filantropiske arbejde. Det handler om samfundsudvikling, det handler om bæredygtighed, det handler om verdensmål. Og når vi nu 1. januar har taget hul på en ny investeringsstrategi, så prøver vi virkelig at vende tilbage til noget, vi forsøgte i nullerne med at lave impact-investeringer. Det var vi ikke så vellykkede med, det var rigtig, rigtig svært. Så har vi taget tilløb til det. Man kan sige, brændt barn skyr ilden, så det tog os nogle år at komme derhen igen. Men de sidste par år har vi arbejdet meget energisk med, hvordan kunne vi blive dygtige til at være med til både at skabe samfundsmæssig nytte, når vi laver filantropi og når vi investerer. Og derfor har vi nu truffet en beslutning om i al almindelighed at styrke vores holdning til ESG på den samlede investeringsformue, men tage 5% af vores samlede kommercielle investeringsformue og lave missionsrettede investeringer, som understøtter vores filantropiske formål. Så det er det, vi gerne vil fortælle lidt om i dag, men vi vil gøre det på vej til at involvere noget international viden på, hvordan kan man handle, hvad er der for nogle konkrete erfaringer, og hvordan kommer det til at gå. Og derfor har vi valgt at lave den her event, hvor vi har professionelle ordstyrer på. Nina, som I alle sammen kender, Nina Munch-Perrin, hun er journalist, tidligere finansvært, så hun ved også rigtig meget om penge ind, som vi kalder det i Realdania. Og i dag er hun studievært på DR-nyhederne. Så det er den måde, det skal foregå på. Det er Nina, der styrer det. Så rigtig hjertelig velkommen til dig, og rigtig hjertelig velkommen til alle sammen.
Thank you, Jesper, and thank you for inviting me to guide you through these next hours of focusing on mission-related investments or impact investments. I think that it's still a very new path for so many investors, but many want to follow the path, but they are also very concerned about, of course, protection of assets, and not at least the return. And sometimes I think it seems like forever that the world saw the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but it's not. Actually, it's not even been 5 years. And still, I think everybody here, I know from myself, are being challenged everywhere I go, everywhere I do business, on which goals that I prioritize in my work. And long before the SDGs, we had the ESGs, the environmental, social, and corporate governance parameters incorporated in investment funds around the world. But I think it's fair to say that interest and volume didn't really take off until we got the SDGs. And today, everybody is thinking about it. And so today, on top of the ESGs, as the hygiene factors I think most investors today care about, we're going to talk about this mission-related investments, impact investments, because it's still an add-on to the ESGs that so many of you already follow. And that's why we're very excited to hear from the GIIN, the Global Impact Investment Network. That's a research-based membership organization from New York that knows a lot about the findings and the data from investors around the world. And we're also very lucky to have real investor experience from the McKnight Foundation, who 6 years ago decided that they would allocate part of their assets towards mission-related investments. Questions are many. How do you screen? How do you risk take? What about return? And of course, the everlasting curse from investors around the world, the balance between being first mover and being too late. We look forward to some answers, and I hope that everybody in here, in case your questions are not being answered, please join in, ask questions. I know both keynote speakers would very much take questions after their presentations. Thereafter, we shall hear from Realdania some thoughts on their new strategy that started here January 1st, and of course, what key takeaways they can bring with them from our keynote speakers. Finally, or maybe first I should say, I would like to give the word to Peter Johansen. As now former Chief Investment Officer from Realdania, you will share with us some thoughts and the focus that Realdania have had for recent years, now moving towards this new era. So please give her a warm welcome, and also this will also be a goodbye greeting to Peter.
Thank you very much, Nina. Yes, I will kick this session off with just a few minutes talking about Realdania's steps towards mission-related investments. And as Jesper mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, besides a few exceptions some years ago, Realdania has always been investing our core capital, or what we call our non-philanthropic investment activities, very much apart from what we are doing on the philanthropic activities as well. So the granting program has not been supported by our investment activities at all. So the split between the two activities has been clear to us. In other words, we have basically have no intention to support the philanthropic activities at all. On the contrary, actually, because our investment activities have only pursued two major goals with our investment activities. The first one is to optimize the risk-adjusted return, and the other one is to manage a core capital protection approach, and everything, of course, within the Realdania ESG guidelines. However, during the last few years, it has become increasingly more clear to us that there may be an unexploited synergies within, or a kind of gap between these two activities that could be filled. And as many other investors, we have thought that by combining the investment goals and our philanthropic goals, which we now express via 6 hand-picked UN Global Sustainable Development Goals, we may be able to not only harvest a decent market return, but also at the same time to increase our philanthropic footprint. So in order to establish a kind of a strong decision platform for perhaps doing that in the future, to filling the gap, the board of directors back in 2017 decided to launch a research project aiming to define a framework where and how Realdania, if we want to, could implement mission-related investments, or what we call MRI, at Realdania. So a small hand-picked internal project group was formed, and that was done with members from both the investment team and the philanthropic team. And this group of people kicked off their work in June 2017. The key findings out of that project was, or at least one of them, was 6 basic principles, some guiding principles that I will just quickly run through here. So first of all, we found that building an MRI portfolio takes time. Don't expect to allocate a large proportion of your portfolio to this area within a very short time frame. That's not possible. Number 2, build on current competences. So don't increase complexity within investment by entering asset classes you don't have any experiences in, and that goes for the philanthropic area as well. Stick to what you know something about upfront. Then cooperation between teams. Both the investment team and the philanthropic team must be involved. Don't construct an organization or a team within the organization that is not anchored in one of the existing teams at all. Number 4, even though it might feel uncomfortable, start up with some investment guideline which is quite wide, and you can narrow it over time. Then expect a quite steep yield curve, learning curve, also yield curve, learning curve. In the beginning, the MRI will not always be able to hit what we can call the bullseye of the philanthropic objectives, but they will over time. And then finally, the reporting and the measurement regime might not be as precise as we're used to, especially when it comes to the impact. It will be built more on common sense rather than on exact figures. So these 6 basic principles were formulated back in after the research project, and that highly influenced the way and the outcome of the strategy process around MRI at Realdania. An important part of our research project was a study trip, actually 2 study trips that we did back in 2018 and 2019. Those trips were at those trips, we met with foundations and organizations with strong knowledge and strong capabilities within impact investing. 2 of the most inspiring meetings we had was with the Global Impact Investment Network, the GIIN, and also the McKnight Foundation. And as Jesper mentioned earlier, and as many of you know, one of the key part of our philosophy at Realdania is to share knowledge and experience with our peers and stakeholders, of which many are gathered in this room today. So I'm very excited to welcome Giselle and Elisabeth here in Copenhagen. Happy to see you here. I know you have traveled long. I'm fully assured that you will inspire this room as you have inspired us when we met back in the US a couple of years ago. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And as Nina mentioned, later on, Kenneth will talk a little bit more about our new investment strategy and some of the initiatives we have done so far at the MRI front. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. So now, from Global Impact Investment Network, in short, the GIIN, we're very happy to welcome the Managing Director, Giselle Leung. Giselle, you've been with GIIN since 2010, and today you are heading up the Investors Council, among other things. Prior to joining the GIIN, you worked for Enterprise Solutions to Poverty. Please give her a warm welcome. Yeah.
Good afternoon, and great to see all of you, and a special thank you to Realdania for organizing this event. It's truly a pleasure to be in your city. What a lovely city. Let me start with a quick story. For many years, I lived within a short walk from the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And there, I learned that as evolution unfolds in the natural world, many scientists believe that most species go through long periods of time with almost no evolution at all. Long periods when there's no change. And then once in a very long time, the equilibrium is suddenly broken, and in a geological split second, an entire species changes dramatically, forever altering its course. This is a theory called the punctuated equilibrium. Why am I telling you this? Well, I believe that we're living in our own moment of punctuated equilibrium in the global financial system. And I believe that we're in our own moment of rapid and significant change. And I think everyone in this room has a role to play in this evolution, in shaping towards a more inclusive, more equitable, and more sustainable system. And this is a future where investment capital is seen as a transformative force for good around the world. As Nina mentioned, I'm Giselle Leung at the GIIN, and I'm really looking forward to a conversation with you all, whether you're just starting out and interested in learning about impact investing or how it fits in this evolution of our global financial system, or maybe you have already started thinking about the effect of your investment. Oh, let me change here. So just a few words about the GIIN. We're the global champion of impact investing, and our mission is to increase its scale and effectiveness. We are a network of practitioners, tens of thousands of investors in our network, including over 330 organizations within our global membership from 40+ countries, and Realdania being one of them. Everything that we do is in service of helping investors make a larger impact through their investment. We were launched 10 years ago, at the time when impact investing is a very new concept. And over the past decade, the role that we play is to help reduce barriers of entry. We do a lot of research, we convene investors, and we build a range of infrastructure tools and resources. So in this afternoon, I'm going to cover a few topics. I'm going to start with just sharing the global context in which the impact investing movement is unfolding. I'll share some thoughts on define impact investing and what its core characteristics is. And then I'll share some findings from our research looking at the latest market trends. And we'll end with looking into the future, where we're headed, and the role that we all play in this firm. Right now, our global community is facing challenges that have never been more urgent. We see headlines of fires and droughts and extreme weathers more and more frequently. Entrenched economic inequality has led to rebellions and repression. And we've burned through 5 years that we have to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, and then frankly, we don't have much to show for it. I'm not saying that there's no progress, it's just that not sufficient. In face of all of this, we're still seeing record level of inequality, tension between the have and have-nots. Not one single industrialized country is on track to meet its commitment of the Paris Climate Accord. Now, in all of this, the political reality and the daily lives of people around the world are also becoming more and more turbulent. We see rising populist tide in Brazil, parts of Europe, and the United States. And last year, there's a steady drumbeat of unrest in Chile, Beirut, Hong Kong. So this moment of tremendous global challenges is happening against a backdrop of tremendous global uncertainty. I know, it's a fairly grim picture, and I know that I'm not sharing anything new with you. And the question is, what are we going to do about all this? Now, you decided to spend this afternoon here, so I hope and I believe that you would agree that we're not going to let uncertainty shackle us to inaction. I believe that this moment of tremendous global challenges is also a moment of tremendous global opportunity. People are desperate for something new. They're talking about having fundamental changes to the financial system in ways that they haven't done for years. More and more are realizing that the way that we invest our money today creates the future that we will live in tomorrow. They have recognized that the financial system, of course, has been making many of the challenges I cited even worse. But there's also increased recognition that the same money that we have, if we invest it differently, can actually make a lasting and more meaningful impact. Now, this notion, this new thinking about reimagining the role of capitalism and financial system is catching on around the world. Late last year, I was particularly excited to see a large-scale survey done by the UK government that shows that 68% of the people would place their capital in sustainable funds or investments if the option is available. Closer to here, the largest bank in Norway, DNB Bank, is making internal changes because they're seeing explosive interest from their clients and customers in ESG products. And a little farther away, the Government Pension Investment Fund of Japan, which holds the largest retirement savings pool in the world, is committing to building more sustainable capitalism with more investments in green bonds, social bonds, and other products. Now, it's not just investors. Other parts of businesses are also taking notice. Last summer, you may have read that the over 180 global businesses that form the Business Roundtable is talking about a new role for business that not only addresses the needs and interests of shareholders, but balancing that with the needs of employers, consumers, local communities, and suppliers. And more recently, the largest global asset management firm, BlackRock, has announced that it is placing climate at the center of its strategy. Now, for me, and I'm sure for you, obviously, words are not the same as action. But what I like to recognize is that we have these global leaders now recognizing that they have a responsibility to the long-term outcome of the decision, and that is a tipping point. And that's when our global financial system, the equilibrium of our financial system, is being punctured. Now, this is clearly a moment of disruption and change, And impact investing is gaining momentum as building this powerful alternative to status quo. It is helping to forge a path to a more sustainable, equitable, inclusive future. And the impact investing industry is building a broad social mandate around investing in a way that's in line with our values, values that respect people and planet. Now, I know we have quite a diverse room. Some may already be making impact investments, and some sitting here wanting to learn. So I wanted to just take a moment to level set what we mean by impact investing. Impact investments are investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental return impact alongside a financial return. It is a very diverse practice, by which I mean investments are made in emerging markets, in developed markets. You can make investments across all asset classes. And they do deliver a range of return from below market to risk-adjusted market rate return, depending on your strategy as well as your requirements. In terms of sectors, impact investors participate in sustainable agriculture, housing, health, renewable energy, you name it. And what do impact investments look like? I'll give you just a few examples. It is an investment in the construction of a LEED-certified apartment complex that provides affordable rental units to low-income New Yorkers, complete with energy-efficient design. It is investment into a South African insurance company that is expanding its business line to provide life insurance to low-income people living with HIV. It is trade finance for a farming cooperative that's producing sustainable cocoa in Dominican Republic. And it's also investments into sustainably managed forests that speaks to the need for conservation and greenhouse gas emission reduction. Now, I know the idea around investing with values or values-based investment has been around for a long time, as Nina had also mentioned. Investors have been doing screening, both negative, positive, integrating environmental, social governance factors, and maybe pursuing thematic investments. So some of you might be wondering what makes impact investing different and distinct. Well, in partnership with leading members of our network, we set out to do just to answer that question. And what we came up and launched last year is a set of core characteristics that meant to outline the practical actions, and they serve as a reference point and outline what is the baseline expectations for making impact investments and participating in this space. There are 4 characteristics. One is, of course, the intention to generate social or environmental impact. That should be quite clear. That means be able to articulate what it is that you're trying to change or address. The second characteristic is use evidence and impact data in your investment design. Because investments should not be made on hunches. Those in the room, you don't do that for any of your investments, and you shouldn't do that any differently if it is making an impact investment. So that means understanding what is it that the issue that you're trying to address, and what's the evidence that shows that the solutions you're going after will produce the results that you want to see. Third characteristic is a management of impact performance. Because at its heart, impact investments are made with a specific intention and should be managed towards that intention. That includes having feedback loops that communicate to all the stakeholders involved, looking at the information you have in order to adjust and manage your investment or portfolio. Last, the fourth characteristic is contribute to the broader industry. That means using industry terms, using standards in your measurement, and sharing your experiences and learnings, as Realdania is offering a platform to do so, and also as Elisabeth will do for McKnight Foundation in just a little bit. All right, so I just walked through what impact investing is, what are the core characteristics that makes this practice distinct and different. I'm going to turn and spend a few minutes sharing with you some of the key findings on the market trends that we're seeing in the market. A little background here. Among the capabilities of the GIIN is we do a lot of research that services data, insights, and also impact and financial performance. The annual Impact Investor Survey is a flagship state-of-the-market report, and we're about to launch the 10th edition this summer. So the findings that I'm going to share with you comes from the most recent report with data contributed by 266 organizations. And it is the largest survey of its kind for the market. The first slide here just shows that it is incredibly diverse market. I think those in your room really represent the spectrum. There are foundations, we have financial firms, we have pensions, and also family offices, a wide range of fund managers, as well as development finance institutions such as IFU here in Denmark, as well as donor agencies that are participating in this. Why are impact investors participating in this? So the two drivers are financial and impact. From the impact side, the lion's share of our respondents say it is in line with our responsibility and commitment as a responsible investor, and it is also aligned with the mission of our organization. But there's also a business case to be made. It is growing client demand for these type of products, as well as the opportunity to have financial returns that's separate from the traditional investment portfolio. Out of the sample of 266 investors, collectively, they're managing $235 billion. And we also did a subset of the repeat respondents looking at the past 4 years. And we know that based on that subset, they're growing their portfolio by 17% per annum. So this is a growing market. Impact investors allocate and invest around the world, split 50-50 roughly between developed markets and emerging markets. The leading industries or sectors they place their capital is food and ag, financial services, but also focused in energy, healthcare, and other sectors that provide affordable access to basic services. In terms of instruments, the private markets still lead with private debt and private equity, but we're also seeing increased inflow into investments in public or listed equity. Historically, the market has focused largely in the private markets, but more and more, we're also building consensus about what it means to pursue a listed equity strategy in this practice. 2/3 of the survey respondents are targeting risk-adjusted market rate return, and the balance is a mix of preserving the principal or accepting a concessionary return because of the particular impact or strategy that they're pursuing. Nina mentioned the SDGs, and that is very much front and center for impact investors. Many of them aligned to SDGs, with the most common ones coalescing around decent work and economic growth, no poverty, reduced inequality. We also ask our survey respondents, do you measure the performance of your impact investment? Are you looking at the performance around impact? And almost universally, they say yes. They pursue different methodologies or methods, some qualitative, some a mix of quantitative and qualitative. And almost all of them, the lion's share would agree that their impact investments are performing in line with their expectations. I mentioned a moment ago that the core characteristics include the use of evidence and data in the investment design, as well as in managing investments. And this shows up in a separate survey we just did, focusing on impact measurement and management. What we find very encouraging, even though there's still more room for as an industry to work towards, is how actively investors are incorporating impact data in due diligence, in screening, and to a lesser extent, thinking about when they're exiting the investment. What does all this add up to? We estimated that the market size for impact investing around the world is at $502 billion. And this figure comes from a different study, just to indicate the difference between the other AUM I noted. Obviously, the market is growing, has a lot of momentum, but there's more to do in order to really bridge the challenges. We also ask in our survey every year, what do you see as the biggest challenge that you face? And almost year after year, we see the response around availability of appropriate capital that meets the risk return. So what kind of capital is needed for a particular enterprise, an early stage or a particular type of investor? We also see gaps in track record and available exit options. I just walked through what the market is today. Let's switch gear, and also let's look ahead. We at the GIIN, we're focused on accelerating the development of impact investing, but our vision is not just about impact investing, and it is much larger. For us, our vision is a world where impact is routinely integrated in all investment decisions, where finance serves all segments of society, and where every investor and analyst would consider routinely risk, return, and impact in the future. To do that, we partner with input from our members to come up with what are the strategies to accelerate the impact investing industry, because we believe that impact investing represents a critical pathway to this future of a different way of thinking about capitalism and a different way of thinking about the role of capital. There are 3 prongs to our strategy. One is we need to mobilize more capital around the world to impact investing. That means raising awareness, providing education to investors that want to come into this space. That means curating information, discussions for those that want to enhance their current practice, do what they do better. It means providing research. The second part of our strategy is safeguarding the integrity of impact investing. That includes be very clear about what impact investing means. That's the core characteristics. And it also means really pushing the frontier to make sure that we're delivering results, that we're paying attention to the impact side as well as the financial side of these investments. Largely, we aspire to fuel a global movement to shift mindset about the role of capital. Because it's not sufficient just talking to the CIOs of pensions. We also need to speak to the pensioners themselves and really educate across all segments of society how their investment and how their capital can build the future of the world they want to live in. I'll spend just a minute talking about what it means in practice in our market building work. We call this strategy broadly as scale with integrity. So what the GIIN is doing, we're now engaging more and more institutional investors that want to learn about this space. We're accelerating the development of products so that those interested in investing have the right products that meet their requirements. We're looking at issues and topics to help investors pursue smarter and more effective strategies, be it in the areas of blended finance, or gender lens, or climate investing. And then lastly, we bring together a global conference that will host the next one at The Hague next year, and this is the largest convening of impact investors. On integrity, we have a decade of experience in measuring impact. We launched a year ago Iris Plus, which is a one-stop shop to help investors translate their impact intentions into results by identifying those evidence-backed core metrics that they can use according to the strategy to track progress to the impact that they want to achieve. Not only are we providing the industry with easy-to-access metrics, we're also building industry methodology on how to actually bring the data together and provide the analytics, the comparisons, and in the future, the benchmarks that the industry needs in order so that investors can treat impact with the same rigor as financial returns. Let me close by going back to the origin of impact investing. The term was coined in 2007, 12 years ago, and it's quite an inspiring story because the early impact investors are clearly going against the grain. There is a dual meaning to impact investing that not many people know. When the early group of impact investors came together, they see impact investing, the meaning number one, is generating an impact, what we've been talking about. But they also look at impact investing, impact as a verb, to have an impact on investing. Now, that vision still very much operates today, but there is at least one difference between now and then. Back then, 12 years ago, these investors operating on the fringes of financial markets, thinking that they can do well by doing good. But today, 2020, we see that this thinking has really taken hold. So, in our own moment of punctuated equilibrium of our financial system, the fringes of the old system is becoming the new normal. I said at the top of my remarks that I see everyone in this room having a role to play in this evolution of our financial system. Having a role would mean different things. For every one of you, it will be very different. It might mean doubling down on your effort. It might also mean making your very first impact investment. But whatever it is that you choose to do, the GIIN is here to support you with the resources that we have. And I'll leave with this final note. I believe that the current system no longer serves us. I believe that our future will be marked by, when we make our investments, is not about counting more money, but making more money count. And I also believe that as we all return to our offices Monday morning, we must act with the renewed knowledge that the way we choose to work with the assets we own, what we choose to do with the assets we manage, will have a profound impact on the world we live in, the planet, and our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Giselle. And now, of course, if you have any questions, just jump in and we'll come down to you. We have Cecilia and Magnus running around with the hand mics, so just blend in. Well, Giselle, but let me start, because you talk a lot about fundamental changes to the financial system, the role of capital, and not counting money all the time, but counting impact. So, what about the return? I mean, should you go uncompromised with the return on investment as well, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. That's a really important question. And there is a myth, in some ways, that if I'm trying to make an impact, I must be sacrificing return. So we have done studies in private equity, in private debt, and real assets that shows that compared to conventional investments in those 3 asset classes, you can absolutely achieve market rate risk-adjusted returns in impact investing strategies. At the same time, manager selection remains paramount, just as you would when you're selecting fund managers in any other types of investments. Now, where there are instances where impact investments might garner or might fetch a below market rate return, typically it is with the intention and the explicit strategy of the investor that want to play a catalytic role. So for example, in hard to penetrate markets or in businesses that are testing a new model to serve, producing a product or services to, say, a rural village in Kenya. Those opportunities would require some risk-taking in order to crowd in additional dollars. So in those instances, we may see a philanthropically or impact-minded investor come in and willing to take on that risk in order to change the risk-return profile and bring in additional investors that have a different type of return requirement.
Mm-hmm. All right, Giselle, we have a question down from the back.
Thank you. My name is Bo Lidegaard. I do advice to some of the investors that are moving into impact investments. And one of the questions that we get very often is the benchmarking, which you alluded to towards the end of your intervention. So basically, how do we actually benchmark and report and disclose the impacts? Mm-hmm. And is there an emerging global standard for doing so? And how do you think this will develop over the next years as the requirements for major investors and asset holders are growing in terms of disclosure and benchmarking?
No, that's a fantastic question. I'm really glad you asked, because that is a huge initiative that we are leading at the GIIN, along with other stakeholders in the market. We're not at a time where we're able to quickly come up with the benchmarks. We believe that is 5 to 7 years away. Now, the building blocks of a benchmark is we need to first agree on what it is that we will measure and how to capture the data, just like you would on the financial side of things. So we develop IRIS Plus, where the metrics themselves are the industry standards. Now, in order to get to a benchmark, there needs to be an agreed, or the feasibility of a methodology that you can actually aggregate the data before you can then figure out how to analyze. And impact in particular is interesting because it's also contextualized. What you invest in Kampala in the same, in energy, access to energy will be different from the scale of the issues you're trying to address in, say, India. And so we have piloted that method of an industry that's replicable on how you can aggregate data and the methodology for driving comparisons. There's a slide that I quickly, on the bottom right, that's a study that we launched, and we're continually building out that the analysis in other industries. We started out doing this in clean energy access and housing. Now, getting to your question about benchmark, if we can agree on the methodology and agree on the analytics that's feasible, now we need data. We're in the early stage of piloting a project with some of the leading investors in our network precisely to do that. Can we develop a repository or a platform where we can actually build data with a size sizable enough so that we can begin to actually do the kind of analysis needed for benchmarking? But we're in the early stage of this effort, and what we see is a lot of interest from even with the commercial players advocating for the need of this work. So I think it is to come, but that's a really good question, an important part of, I would just end by saying that, we believe that having that kind of a data is really helped encourage a fund manager, or, if you're an investor, it allows you to really see what are the funds that are going to allow me to achieve the impact, the highest impact. And if you're fund managers, you know where you stand and where you stack against your peers. And this type of transparency is what we see the market demanding.
You have a follow-up in here, in the middle. Yep.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ulrik Fonsmark. I'm from a leading European social impact fund. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is a bit as Paul Nygård's about the benchmarks. You know, there's many levels of impact, as you probably know. Do you know any statistics about how many investment funds limits their income or their carried depending on the KPI or the benchmarks?
Yes, it's one of my favorite topics because it's one of my favorite projects that I did back in 2011 shortly after I joined the GIIN. There are still very few. There is an issue brief that you can find on our website that looks at how to base bonus or carry or social carry based on impact. From what I have seen, it remains just a handful of fund managers that are doing that. I do think that is, if we're trying to walk the talk, then it is important, but it's not a wide uptake. I do see some investors beginning to think about whether that should be a requirement, or some fund managers on their own decided to take that up. But to my knowledge, the number is less than 10, but that's to my own knowledge. There might be others that we haven't seen. But I get this question actually quite often, so we should think about whether to update that study.
So I'll just, one more question up here from me, Giselle, because talking about maybe main obstacles for investors who wants to start doing impact investments but haven't started yet, and also listening to you talking, not just being the money guy or girl, and I'm sure you must discuss that in your investor council as well with the experiences you have. I mean, doesn't it take up too many resources, or how much resources does it take up in order to actually keep an eye out on your investments if you want to go down this path?
What we have seen, it depends. The structure can be quite different. We have just recently released a survey looking at the impact management. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. But it really varies how it is being organized. We have seen it ranging from having a full-time person on the team, in the case of a fund manager that maybe, or a foundation or a institutional asset owner that focused on studying the impact from, throughout the investment's life cycle. But we have also gotten indications that, some of the impact investors see this is not separate. They see this truly integrated. So it's hard for them to think about what is that resource because the practice itself requires the integration. To those that that might wonder, what is the resource requirement to measure and manage impact? I would say that it is a requirement, but it doesn't need to be overly burdensome. But the important thing really is this learning curve of understanding what it means is a new set of tools and that will be baked into making impact investments.
And then just final question on the impact washing, the risk of impact washing. That must be a concern of you also for your members. I mean, how to, I don't know if you've experienced it, if you've had discussions on it in your investors council, but how to avoid it.
There will probably be impact washing. I don't think we can just say it will never happen. But I do think the encouraging news, as I showed earlier, is that in our survey, the lion's share of investors are doing this. And what we know the reason they're doing this, partly because they do want to track their result, partly because they need and want to report to their stakeholders, either their LPs or internally or back to their businesses. What we also know, and we have studies on this, that shows the business value of actually looking at impact data. And so when the market is moving towards recognizing not only making the case of impact management, but thinking about how to integrate it, and when there is, and we've also seen in a separate survey that the one demand or challenge is how to make impact data more transparent. I think what we're seeing is the tide is working in favor of, this is becoming a norm. So by the resources that we produce that will make it easy for investors to track impact, and also as you look around the room what peers are doing, I think we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Giselle, Leung, thank you very much for your presentation here and for following. Yeah, thank you. So, let me see if I can get onto the right slide. So now, we are so happy now from the McKnight Foundation, actually founded by an early leader from the gigantic 3M company, to introduce the Director of Investments, Elisabeth McGeveran. You came to McKnight Foundation in 2014 as Director of Impact Investments, and back then in 2014 it was just decided that you should allocate part of the assets towards impact investments. Then since last year you were appointed Director of All Investments, so I gather something went right. Please welcome Elisabeth McGeveran.
Thank you. Well, I don't know about you, but Giselle, you can sign me up for your vision of the world, because I think that's the way we all need to go with our investments. It's a real honor to be here. This is my first time in Denmark, so that's a particular treat. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. I work for a foundation. We have a $2.3 billion endowment. It was founded in 1953 with a donation of stock from William and Maud McKnight. William was the first CEO of the 3M Corporation, so early, known early for sandpaper, known later for the Post-it note. In these days, they're probably going to be well known for their very robust respiratory mask division. I've called out Minnesota here. We're at the very top and in the middle. I don't expect people to know where Minnesota is. But I wanted to show you where we are because we are a place-based funder. So that means that 60% of our grants stay in the state of Minnesota and 75% of the grants stay in the Midwestern region. William McKnight is still studied in business schools today because scientists at 3M are given 15% of their time, 1-5, to study anything they want. And it was part of his vision that you had to give people room to think new thoughts, because he famously said, if you put fences around people, then you get sheep. This is our mission statement. It's very broad. We are a longtime funder of the arts, of neuroscience. We have an international crop research program. We have a number of community programs based on kind of vibrant, equitable communities in Minnesota, and we have a climate change program. And I'm going to talk particularly about climate change today, mostly because it's an international challenge that we all share. So let me tell you a little bit about my place. The state of Minnesota, it is rich in both natural and human resources. We are the headwaters of the Mississippi River, a mighty, both commercial and ecological river that cuts straight through our nation, all the way to New Orleans. We have 11 sovereign American Indian nations inside the borders of our state, both Ojibwe and Dakota people. Minnesota is very rich in farmland, so we have 5 times the land of Denmark, and you edge us out for population by about 200,000 people. So give you the sense of the scope, mostly corn and soybean farming, so pretty dramatic negative impacts on the environment and a lack of biodiversity. So what about Minnesota's imports? These are our resources. What do we import? We've imported Scandinavians. 32% of Minnesotans are of Scandinavian descent, particularly Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian. So I was telling some folks at dinner last night, there's a phrase in Minnesota about Norwegian bachelor farmers, which, men who say 100 words a year and live with their brother, and farm. In fact, we have a restaurant in Minneapolis that's a very fancy restaurant, kind of nouveau Scandinavian, and it's called The Bachelor Farmer. So I invite you all to come to Minnesota. In terms of other imports, we now have East African people, our growing immigrant community. We have the largest population of Somali people in the United States and outside of Somalia. And so our human resources are diversifying and growing, and we're really excited about that. And this is our best export, Prince, a musical genius. He was famously a Minnesotan and built his studios and lived his whole life in Minnesota. So That's our place. Let me tell you about our institution a little bit. We have a board of directors that has community members and family members. We're into the 4th generation of the McKnight family, so that means Gen Xers. And like all new generations, they like to ask new questions that their parents weren't asking. And our Gen X board members asked, how can we find more resources to grapple with such complicated problems that we're trying to solve with grant making? Our grant-making dollars aren't enough. What more can we do? And so their answer in 2013 was to form a board staff working group and spend a lot of time exploring ESG, SRI, impact investing. And it resulted in a new strategic framework that kind of guides our behaviors and practices. And what's most important here is it says our deepest responsibility is to use all our resources for mission impact. And it sounds so simple, but that was actually quite revolutionary when you have a board that thinks we invest the money to make as much as we can and we spend the money over here, and the two sides don't connect with each other. But the notion that all the resources were part of pursuing mission all the time allowed people to have kind of a pivot toward the role of the endowment. US tax law requires private foundations to spend 5% of our endowment annually on charitable activity. That includes administration and also grants. So that leaves 95% of the endowment that you can actually work with, but that had previously kind of been untapped. So in 2013, by the end of the year, the staff working group took to the board a commitment to take 10% of the endowment, carve it out, so at the time $200 million, and dedicate it to impact. And what was interesting here was the board built a structure that had some very good guideposts, but was also very loose and allowed for the organization to figure out how to do the implementation in a way that felt right inside of our own culture. One of the first things they did was they identified which of our grant-making programs were going to be part of the impact investing program. So I could do neuroscience investing, but as many of you know, that's very early stage and very risky, and none of us are qualified to do it. So we weren't going to do neuroscience. But we were going to focus on the Midwest Climate and Energy Program and on vibrant and economic communities. So for the Midwest Climate and Energy Program, our goal is to take bold action on the climate crisis by dramatically cutting pollution in the Midwest by 2030. And the Vibrant and Equitable Communities Program is looking to promote economic mobility, advance equitable development, and increase civic engagement with a particular focus on racial equity, because the investment gap between white communities and people of color in the US, and particularly our state, it's very wide and it's one of our greatest failures, that we have not done more to address racial equity. So our grant makers, they're the agents of social change. They decide what the strategy is. They put the grant money to work. And the investment team follows their lead. But it's the investment team that sets the investment strategy. So just because I think the shared economy is a fantastic new thing, if they're not spending grant money on the shared economy, trying to shape it and move it and define it, then I'm not going to spend investment dollars there. So that's one thing. They set the course. But then it's up to us to decide what that means as an investor. So we're a place-based investor, but we opted for broader geographic boundaries because I can't put together a properly diversified portfolio out of investments from Minnesota or the Midwest. We have international grant making, but we decided that one piece of risk we could control easily was to keep our impact investing program domestic. Just makes it easier to diligence, implement, and track. We decided to be asset class agnostic. We wanted to go where we saw opportunities, and we weren't going to predefine what it was that we would find when we were out in the market. And then the key thing we discovered very quickly was in impact investing, it's a whole lot easier when you're swimming with markets than swimming against markets. So we have a very robust real estate market in the Twin Cities. Every piece of work we do on affordable housing is directly going in the face of all economic forces, and that is an important thing to do, but that's going to affect the tools we choose to use. Whereas our work in the climate and energy space is very much flowing where markets are going, how prices are dropping. We have lots of opportunity there. So kind of understand what the economic forces are around the issue you actually care about, and be realistic about what you can and can't do in markets. In terms of our structure, this is a case study, so I have to show you at least one org chart. We decided we needed a second committee. And there are there's 75% overlap in the people on the investment committee and the mission investment committee, but I literally moved them from one room to another, and it's almost like you take them and walk them into a new space, and it gives people a little bit more of an ability to think differently about risk, a little bit more expansiveness about, yeah, we could try that, even if maybe I've never tried that in my 50-year career before. And we hired an experienced advisor. So we use Mercer for our main part of the endowment, but for the 10% for impact, we work with Imprint Capital, which was purchased by Goldman Sachs in 2015. Cambridge Associates also has a robust practice there, and that specialty consulting support has been extremely important. So how do we get started? We've got 10%, we've got $200 million. Where do you begin? Well, we started with some buckets. We'll put $50 million into catalytic capital. That's by definition, by IRS definition in the US, it has to be invested in a charitable manner. So we have to, it's either too high risk or below market return in order to deploy that money. We're going to have private investment bucket. We want to take reasonable risk here, but we think because it's a little bit unknown that the risk profile is going to be greater, just because it's unknown. And it's asset class agnostic, so we can't set one benchmark because you'd be comparing apples and oranges. Now with the privates, though, we did set what we call, basically, I call a failure rate. So if this portfolio over a 3 or 5 year period does less than 6%, we shouldn't be doing impact investing at all. We're spending too much money, we're wasting resources. The idea here is I want a portfolio that performs far better than that. But we decided we couldn't predetermine what the right performance goal was, but we did need to think about what got too expensive. So that's kind of how we're working, is we hope we'll have something to kind of help us know if we're barking up the wrong tree. And finally, for our public markets, both bonds and equities, we use traditional benchmarks. No specialty, no FTSE for good, nope. It's just got to be benchmarks everyone knows and uses, and we expect to get performance against those benchmarks. Oh. So this are the returns that our board of directors set for us. Every impact investment seeks 3 types of returns. We have financial returns, we've just described with our benchmarks. We're seeking environmental and social impacts, the kinds of impacts that Giselle talked about so clearly that we want to measure and understand. But we're also seeking learning returns. And this is a little bit different than other foundations. And by this, it means my team needs to deliver learning returns about capital markets and commercial forces to my colleagues on the grant-making side. So they need to be smarter and better grant makers because McKnight has an impact investing program. And that's a little bit different, but it's created a lot of support and connection between the program side and the investment team. And we have a process that we use to actually get together when we start an investment and we finish one, even an investment we don't make, and we actually talk to one another about, this was my hypothesis, well, this was my hypothesis, these were insights I gathered, this is a data point I'd still like to know. So we have a process for actually institutionalizing the learning. And I have seen the grant makers change the way, some of the grant making they do. For example, they're no longer so eager to fund nonprofit intermediaries that are supposedly trying to join up capital markets to each other. Partly because they say, oh, I see in this part of the climate market, actually there is a robust private market. So it's interesting to see how the learning piece kind of works itself out throughout the organization. So where are we today in 2020? This is the impact carve-out. It's fully committed. Not entirely deployed, but fully committed. You can see the different areas where we're finding we've deployed money. Once again, swimming with markets, climate and energy. That's the place where we've really found the most opportunity and the most diverse opportunity. In the community space, a lot of this money is concessionary, which is fine. And sometimes that'll be times like right now, it'll be the best performing part of our endowment. 2%, that's pretty good right now. So that was kind of the carve-out piece, but there's more money too, and we looked more broadly than just that carve-out. In 2014, we thought we could do better, but we didn't quite know what we had. So it was time to do some kind of sleuthing research into our public managers. And we looked broadly, we took stock of the endowment, and one thing we realized was we had some fund managers who had ESG practices that were pretty sophisticated or interesting. We also discovered that we had one particular fund, a Russell 3000 tracker fund, that was very carbon intensive. It owned everything in the market, and it was just, ugh. And so we thought, well, what can we do with this? And instead of firing the manager, we went to the manager, it was Mellon Capital, and we said, what can we do about this product? We like the role it holds in our portfolio, but we don't like the carbon piece. And so together we built this thing called the Carbon Efficiency Strategy. It was the first one in the US. It launched in 2014. And what it is, it has no coal. And then we're over and underweighting companies based on their greenhouse gas emissions per unit of sales, per dollar, and within the sector. So we're looking for the most efficient actors in a sector. So what that gets is in the utility space, we overweight Patent Energy Group, which has a very kind of strong renewable strategy. And we underweight Southern Company, one of the largest utility companies in the US, and it really is very, very reliant on coal. It doesn't say that it has a renewable strategy, but we just have a little bit less exposure to it. So this is an example. We have not divested from fossil fuels, but we are working to decarbonize our portfolio. We keep looking for what's the next wise action that lets us take another step towards decarbonization. So this fund has had its 5-year anniversary, and it still does everything we wanted it to do. In fact, it's outperforming its benchmark by 30 basis points. So for a passive product, getting 30 basis points of outperformance, reducing the carbon intensity by 53% in 5 years, we're pretty happy with that. And it's still low tracking error, it still has low fees, and it still provides us broad market exposure in the US. We also, though, want to understand what it doesn't do. And this does not reduce carbon in the atmosphere. It doesn't change the way anyone produces carbon pollution. What it changes is our endowment's exposure to companies that are creating carbon pollution. So it's not the answer. So we started saying, this is not impact for us. This is aligned. And we seeded it with $100 million from the endowment, additionally on top of that carve-out. And our goal, one of the things I would just say is in this space of impact investing, philanthropic investors are very, very tempted to build super special products because they're used to having grants where they get everything they want. I want this bell, I want this whistle, it needs to look like this, and it has to do that. And we tried really hard to not do that, as hard as it was, because the idea was if it's too custom, no other investor will ever invest in it, and then it will die or will be neglected by the fund manager. So sometimes I think thinking about balancing your own interests against what might succeed in the marketplace so you can be involved in a thriving product is a good question to ask yourself. Today, we're doing a lot more analysis around our public portfolio. This is managers that we have 10 years or less of data on. We have some that actually go back further, but we just use 10 as a cutoff, so no, this doesn't include 2008. What this is looking at the ESG risk in a manager's holdings, less risky here, more risky down there, and then this is factor-adjusted assessment of who's bringing alpha to the portfolio. So let's see if I can get these guys, both impact investments. Very low ESG risk, very high alpha. These two, no surprise, a lot of emerging market exposure, right? So the F is a value manager. S kind of focuses on capital preservation. But looking at the ESG risk was really informative for us in our engagement. We see our managers, we want to talk to them. Manager F has a ton of Southeast Asia real estate exposure. Now, we don't have much commercial real estate in the portfolio, and I certainly don't want real estate in Florida or places like that. But interestingly to me, I've got a lot of Southeast Asian real estate. Something good to talk to our manager about. This doesn't mean we fire them, but it gives us a sense of who we're dealing with and what kind of performance we're getting. I think it's common for presidents of foundations, I will speak for my own and I'll speak for peers, that when they get up in the morning and look in the mirror, what they see back is a philanthropist or a social change agent or an NGO actor, all really important roles. One of the goals of our impact investing program is for our staff and our president to look in the mirror and see an institutional investor looking back at her. Because institutional investors have a lot of power. And impact investing, we're frequently, I think, overly focused on the asset owner. Where do I invest my money? What do my fund managers do? You know, do I have good investments or bad investments? Clearly the number one work that we all do in the room. But we forget this, that we're somebody's customer. They want our business. And if they want our business, they need to work for it. And if they're going to work for it, I want to ask them to do things that I want them to do. So for example, why haven't any of my private equity managers signed this really very big international investor statement on climate risk? Because nobody has asked them to. So some of the work we do is asking our fund managers to tell us what data they're using, take certain kinds of public action, create a public voice that might support a political solution in the US one of these days. We're shareholders. We can ask companies to provide different data for us. We can vote proxies. And we have standing with the US Securities Exchange Commission. We have standing with the New York Stock Exchange. We should weigh in on policies and practices that influence disclosure, transparency, impact investing. Those all have regulatory pieces that we have to support. So I report to my board based on this. This is what my board memo, the investment team board memo, looks like in those 4 categories. Okay, in 2017, we'd been doing it a while. We'd started with some public activity, and lo and behold, Generation Global Equity was outperforming by a long way, and the investment committee wanted it. So instead of making a $25 million investment, we bumped it up to $100 million. And today it's worth $185 million. So it's one of those upper right zone performers. And so instead of us asking, you know, is there a fund that's good enough, this 10% gave us a really interesting option to get to know a fund manager with a much smaller allocation than we'd make normally. So someone at 25 million, we're like, yeah, we can try that. And it's almost like an audition for a play. You start on the small stage, and then if it's a good play, you go to the big stage. And that's what happened with Generation. It's happening currently with another fund we're looking at. And there's also the part where if you've performed in the impact portfolio and you haven't done well, at some point you got to break up, right? So this is something we didn't anticipate, but it's been quite valuable. If you'd like to see our public equity portfolio that we define as being sustainable, all of our investments in the impact program are on our website. They're fully transparent. You can go look. You can look at performance. So 4 out of our 7 funds are ahead of their benchmark in the public portfolio, and 6 of the 7 are adding market risk-adjusted alpha. So they're not all good, and certain markets are better for them than others. You know, we're going to see what happens in this next round. But in terms of getting back to your point about cost, the public performance we've had from these funds has paid for the rest of the impact investing program and much more. So that kind of took care of some of the cost concerns. Okay, private markets. We really got going in 2018 and 2019. I'm going to talk about climate. Here's why. If the Midwest of the US was its own country based on coal, electricity generation from coal, and from our industrial base, we would be the 6th largest emitter of all the countries in the globe. So everyone's paying attention to the coasts, but really, if the US doesn't figure out climate change in the Midwest, the US can't figure out climate change in our market at all. So this is one of the reasons, you know, we are focused as a grant maker on how do we transform our energy economy, and then how can McKnight's private portfolio play in that. I'll skip that. Okay, so these are some of the things that are showing up for us. Proterra, it's an electric bus company. It's the Tesla of buses. Instead of taking a regular diesel bus and kind of trying to fix it up, they're like, build a new bus from the ground up, just like a Tesla. So that's in one of our portfolios. It's a growth equity manager. It's called G2VP. One of our real asset managers called Vision Ridge recently did an acquisition with Havila of this Norwegian ferry company, and they are financing the transition to go electric. You know, so this is a real asset for us by a fund manager. We know nothing about it, but we're really excited to learn about it and find out more. And back to the point about learning, sometimes I actually send the grant-making staff to an LP meeting. You know, I can get most of what I need, talking to them on the phone or from reporting, but sometimes our grant makers the grant makers that are working on electrification, to go for 2 days and spend time with investors talking about different types of business opportunities in the electrification space, they learn a lot. And they find it really energizing and really exciting. So I love sharing the access to these investors with our grant makers because it helps them do their job better. This is a direct investment we have, so we actually participated in the Series B and C here. This online virtual utility company operates in all 50 states, regulated and deregulated markets. It allows renters who don't control who puts the electricity in their building. It lets them choose. And our grant makers like it because it has created a shared market of consumers that all care about renewable power. And then finally, in the private space, this is a concessionary investment. It's with a nonprofit bank in the coal mining region of the US. They are helping Appalachia transition with loans and technical assistance, and we've given them $2 million for 10 years at 2% interest. Okay, I want to tell you one quick story. This is about the real flexibility of impact investing. This is the part that's really both time-consuming and exciting. This company is a solar leasing company. So they put rooftop solar on, and then you pay them for it month after month with the savings from your utility bill. What's interesting about this, every other solar leaser in the US wants big houses with rich people with beautiful credit. This company wants low-income people. They don't even check their credit because they know they'll pay the bill as long as they're saving money on their utility bill. So here's what's different. All of their customers are low to moderate income people. They each save an average savings of $500 a year. Some save more. 60% of their installers come from the neighborhoods where they work. And since 2011, they've installed 15,000 solar units on the homes of low-income people. Now, we've been approached as a foundation to provide $5 million for 10 to 12 years, and they tell us we'll be able to install solar and do lending for low-income people, and we're going to get 150 units in the next 10 years. So for our grant makers and for us, the notion of a business model that can get you to 15,000 versus 150 for the same money, and maybe with some upside, is kind of an amazing opportunity. So with Posigen, we started in a commercial lending relationship. We lent them $8 million at 10%. We were part of a syndicate with other impact investors, commercially structured, prepayment fees, everything you'd expect. They paid us early. We made 11% on the entire loan, and they refinanced us with a $100 million line of credit from a hedge fund. So they went from having access to $30 million of asset-backed borrowing to $100 million of asset-backed borrowing. And then they got in a little trouble because they had some extractive, very high-cost debt to the corporation that they'd had to take on a while ago, and they had a cash crunch last year. And they came to McKnight and said, can we do a loan? Can you get us a bridge till our next equity raise? And when we looked at it, we couldn't set the interest rate at a price that was similarly not extractive. Their whole problem was they had they had high-priced debt, and that was, squeezing them. So I said, I can't price this for you. I can't get to the right commercial price. But instead of a high-price loan, would you rather have a low-cost loan? Here's a 2% loan, which is hard for people to get. It was hard for my committee to get your head around that, right? It's too risky, so we got to go cheaper. So we've loaned them $2.5 million. They're working on a preferred equity raise. If people in the room are interested, let me know, because there is a little space. What's interesting is they've got a lot of mainstream investor names in this next preferred equity round. When that gets closed, we'll be refinanced out of the loan. We'll have warrants that we'll exercise, so we have a little bit of exposure to the upside. So altogether, a really interesting long relationship where we're trying to provide different capital. This is what the private portfolio looks like, pretty standard, heavy on growth, heavy on venture. We have not found a lot of leverage buyout opportunity. That's what we're missing. You can always map to the SDGs. This is work, kind of some of the measurement and reporting SDG work. Imprint Capital, part of Goldman Sachs, does that for us, makes it easy. And, you know, we do track our impacts, but we don't spend a lot of time on it. For me, I'd rather find a business where the general thesis is if this business grows, then these impacts we're expecting will happen, and then I don't have to track it super carefully. And I want businesses to be able to pivot. If their theory about what's going to sell or work doesn't work, I don't want to lock them in with impact covenants or impact promises. I want the business to be able to adapt to whatever market conditions they're finding, because that's the only way we'll build a new economy. So this is just an example. In 2018, companies that we owned or invested in generated 1 million megawatt hours of renewable power. That's about 100,000 homes a year. This doesn't include the debt that we are lending to solar developers through some other. So in closing, in 2022, let's take stock. Where is McKnight today? So from having almost no connection between the investment portfolio and our mission, today 1 out of every $3 reflects our institutional values in some way. It's common wisdom by CIOs that this can't be done. Committees are skeptical. But the reason McKnight shares is because we do think this can be done prudently, opportunistically, and with financial success in mind, along with other kinds of goals in mind. So the board, we've allocated our impact, we're out of money. What happens? Well, our board decided that instead of having a ceiling, a 10% ceiling that we had met, now it was a floor. We were going to have 10% for impact, and now the impact team and the committee, as we find good opportunities that meet our risk profile and work together, can go as high as we think it makes sense to go. So that's been a really wonderful kind of endorsement at the 5-year period. So I just want to close with something. It's a phrase that's part of the McKnight strategic plan. It's a phrase that I find to be the most compelling in the entire plan. What we say is our grant makers, as investors and as grant makers, and I would personally add as citizens, we at McKnight are called to be brutally realistic and fiercely optimistic. And to me, that is what investors always do. We are brutally realistic about what is in front of us, but in some ways, the act of investing almost always, unless you're a real contrarian, is an act of optimism for the future long term. So as long-term investors, we've signed up for Giselle's vision. We think that our dollars can do more, but we need to be brutally realistic and fiercely optimistic. Thank you.
Whoa. Thank you, Elisabeth. So, first question. So when you went to your committee and told them that it was too risky, so you had to go cheaper, how did you convince them that was a good idea?
Well, we had a category, a concessionary category, so they understood the category. But what was fascinating was our grant makers were super excited by the fact that we were going to be offering this concessionary capital to a for-profit business, which you are allowed to do by the IRS if you've decided it's too risky. Our committee, though, struggled with that. They felt more comfortable doing concessionary stuff with our grantees, with nonprofits. And so they kept getting hung up on, well, we're going to take a hit and save their equity investors and help them refinance extractive debt. So all these other commercial players are going to benefit, and we're going to take a hit. And that was hard to work through, but that's when we really came back to the mission, the impact. This was the most effective way we have seen in the entire US to address access for low-income people. And it was capital efficient, even if we weren't using our capital to get the very highest return that maybe some of the other participants were getting.
All right.
So they did cut me back, though. I wanted to do 5 million, and they cut me back to 2.5.
Okay, but Elisabeth, please take us just a bit back to when you got the job in 2014, because that was when the board had decided that allocate 10%, and of course it was a board decision, and you were to get the program running. What would you say were your main obstacle in succeeding? Do you have some failures that you can share with us?
I do. One thing I discovered was knowing the character of your committee was really important. That the McKnight, I think, as an institution and our committees, they learn best by doing. So some people are in institutions where you really need a roadmap that tells you exactly the route you're taking. McKnight actually does better learning through investments. So
Sounds expensive.
Well, they say no a lot. You got to be ready to be said no to. But it's almost like developing case law. You put 4 or 5 housing investments in front of them, and it's like, no, no, yes, yes, no. You start to see, okay, these are the conditions that a housing investment in the impact space is going to work for them. So that was part of it. And the other part was I looked across all our U.S. separately managed accounts. Except for this carbon efficiency strategy, there was no coal. And I went to the committee and I said, great, we don't have any domestic coal. Let's just put a policy in place that says none of our managers can buy coal. And I had not done the kind of warm-up work on that policy because I thought it's just reflecting reality. And nope, don't want to do it. We don't know that we're divesting. That's too much policy. Interestingly, 2 years later, when we looked at a kind of analysis of the portfolio and where we had oil sands, we still didn't have any coal exposure. They looked at the data and they said, why do we have oil sands in our separately managed accounts? We should just get rid of that. Okay, happy to do it. So that's interesting, kind of leading with a policy that was kind of controlling was not necessarily for my committee the best way to go, but other people have to have that kind of specificity before they start.
Mm. Okay, so we have a question down there. Yeah.
Sorry about that. As an employee in the Danish Ministry of Climate, I am fully sort of congratulating on your focus. I think that's just the right one. I think a question on you, sort of, you had these 4 boxes where you were using power. Mm-hmm. And I think in some way, most of those boxes were still on the sort of the supply side. And I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate a bit on, given you had wind turbines, you have solar, I mean, the risk of those are very limited. I mean, we know the technology, we know people use electricity, we know the wind is blowing. So the only risk is actually that you can sell the current for 20 years. And that is demand side. So, I mean, do impact investment, I mean, do you have a role of exercising, not at sort of the political, presidential level, but this sort of make sure that you can just sell the current, but because if you can that, then all the risks are gone and you can just sort of scale up renewable dramatically.
Right. Our grant makers are very interested in the demand side. One of the things they're interested in is how do you build durable public will, both amongst consumers and amongst the business community, to support the right proactive policies, the right kinds of, we have public utility commissions in every region and state, so we don't have one national energy policy. It's very complicated. So building durable public will is very high on their agenda, and I see that as kind of part of our demand side. The direct investment we have in Arcadia Power is another place we're building demand side, kind of crystallizing how many people who can't access renewables through their normal routes will access it through other places. But yeah, I would say, I think there's a lot of risk in our portfolio. The wind turbine technology is going obsolete maybe faster than we think. Power purchasing agreements are valuable because we expect the price of electricity to rise, but what if the price of electricity falls? So some of the inherent assumptions we have built into any investment over a 10 and 20-year period are, we're hoping for the best. We're planning to try to manage our risk. But we can't foresee the future.
Okay, so just a quick question to you also on the impact washing. You said that you don't spend too much effort tracking. If the business growth is a success, but do you think that your foundation has ever been involved in impact washing? That you did something and you found out that it was built on a lie?
Right. No, that's never happened. I mean, I like to think of our regular endowment kind of like me, pre-diabetic, right? My dad has diabetes. I'm a little curvy. I maybe don't exercise as much as I should. And it could be better, right? So I think our portfolio is a little pre-diabetic, right? It's fine now, but down the road, it's going to get pretty sick.
Okay.
So for me, I'm less worried about kind of purity testing everything we do, and I'm really more interested about how do I introduce better eating into our portfolio? How do I introduce regular exercise? And kind of do that type of maintenance. And as far as impact washing goes, frankly, I mean, the market's open. If it's a good idea, we will have impact washing because it means everyone will come into the market, and like everything else in investing, it's up to us to evaluate and decide who we think's good and who we think's not. So I don't think a lot of proactive worry on our part about impact washing is particularly useful, frankly.
Okay. So you said that the 10%, the ceiling was kind of off because things were going so well. So projecting two years into the horizon, what would you say that your the part of your assets, how much is in impact investment? I mean, how fast will you grow this area?
Yeah, we haven't had real assets traditionally. We've just not been a real asset investor. One thing we decided was we added real assets last year, and then very quickly the committee decided, you know what, we don't want to do traditional real assets. We don't like real estate, and we don't like, certainly not oil and gas. We'll only put real estate, we'll only put these ideas into the portfolio when they come through the sustainability door. So that's an example for us of a new asset class that's coming in and pretty much is only going to be sustainability. Anything that's conventional or like things used to be, we're just not going to do it. So I think if we end up finding a lot of, if we fill out that asset class quickly, that's another 5% of the portfolio. We're going to add a new $100 million U.S. domestic manager. This time we're looking to make sure there's kind of more fulsome thinking around ESG. So I would expect we'll kind of, keep our pace.
And you believe in 100% impact allocation?
I certainly believe in it. Yes, in time. Do I have a mandate to do that? No.
No. Thank you, Elisabeth. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So,
are we all now?
Yes, you will. I will let you go down now for a few minutes, and I will invite you back up on stage, Elisabeth. And I'll just see if even though this is a great slide, I think we are supposed to bring it to the next speaker, because now Kenneth Winther, the new Chief Investment Officer from Realdania, will share with us the new strategy for Realdania. So, of course, just a few words on you, Kenneth. You are rather new in Realdania. You came in last month, and prior to that, you were in Tryg for many, many years, latest as head of investments in Tryg Invest. Yes. Let's give you a warm welcome.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I will talk about our new investment strategy and especially focus on 3 big changes. The first one is the investment horizon, or the strategy horizon. The second one is on ESG and responsible investing, while the third one is on mission-related investments, of course. So going into the strategy, you can see it's from 2020 to 2026, so it's 7 years. And we usually did a 4-year horizon. And the reason for going from a 4-year period to a 7-year time horizon, you probably know in this room. Yes, what we can do in 4 years with Peter Johansen, we need 7 years to do without you, Peter. Besides Peter, the new horizon aligns better with our strategic goals. We want to be here for future generations, not just the current ones. And in investments, we know that if we are able to take risk when nobody else are, that's when they are rewarded the most. And such contrarian strategies need time to unfold. Thirdly, we want to take on more liquidity risk because we know that that is usually bringing on some more return. And how especially are we going to do that on illiquidity? This is our allowed asset classes. And as you can see from the left side of it, we have listed investments like equities, bonds, and credit. But to the right, we have these green ones, which is private equity, real estate, and other alternatives, which is our illiquid asset classes. And this is the distribution today. Today, we have mostly equity risk, while the illiquid asset classes in total is 28%. In the current investment strategy, this is how it's going to change. We significantly increase our illiquid assets to 45%. That diversifies away from listed equities, as well as potentially harvesting more returns from the illiquidity risk. And now to one of my absolute favorite topics, the ESG and responsible investing. This is the largest stock market in the world, the S&P 500. And in 1975, this is the distribution. We have more than 80% of the value, of the market value of the companies consisted of tangible assets. So that is property, plant, equipment, tangible assets, while under 20% of it was more fuzzy intangibles. And my quiz to you is, how do these proportions look today? So 4 decades later in 2015, how does this look? Do we have a higher percentage of tangible assets? Any wild guesses? Let's look decade by decade. Today, it's completely different. Today, most of the value of companies is something you cannot touch. It's intangible assets. And that's why the potential for ESG investing is so huge. We have an enormous number of numbers and metrics increasingly coming out on environmental, social, and governance issues, and we want to embrace those to catch the large piece of this pie. So the potential is huge, but will it be easy to harvest? This is the world stock market over a 10-year period. And as you can see, it has been an incredibly well period, absolutely doubling in terms of return. But what about if we took some coal stocks? You mentioned them earlier. Completely different. And of course, you shouldn't have had coal in your portfolio in this period. What about if we take the flip side of it and say, well, we want some clean energy stocks? That's interesting. Oops. Equally poor. So while we believe that there's a lot of potential returns and performance to harvest under ESG investing, it will not be as easy as you might think. It demands a lot of hard work. So as Peter showed in the beginning, we will be going more for the active ESG approaches quite a lot, while we add a new investment asset class on top of that, which is the mission-related investment. And mission-related investment is trying to harvest the double bottom line. You explained that a lot on the impact investing. Mission-related investment is just like that, just that we narrow it down so that the impact is directly related to our mission. And how will we do that? We group them into two different categories. We have thematic mission-related investment and some targeted. And here we have some of the specific which we kind of try to go for. And as you can see from the left side, the thematic can be listed investments, just like equities and bonds, where we try to improve the SDGs, the 6 SDGs, which we use in our philanthropic processes. It can also be on the unlisted side with private equity structures directly linked to one of those SDGs, while the targeted could be all the way down to single assets to enhance and go directly for our philanthropic effect, just as on the philanthropic side. The returns, you were asked about that earlier on. We expect to get a risk-adjusted returns equally as good as on our other investments. No more, no less. In terms of the size that we expect over this strategy period, we expect up to 5% of our portfolio in these thematic mission-related investments. That's $1 billion, so we are thinking this is ambitious. While on the targeted side, we are pragmatic and realistic. These are harder to source, and these are especially harder to source with scale. But where will we source it? We think it's okay to source the thematic ones through asset managers and consultants, and maybe from some of you out there. While on the targeted side, the sourcing will primarily be from our own philanthropic processes. So it's a new asset class in our investment strategy from 1st of January, but we have already committed to our first investment. It's called Sushi. And it's an example of what we will do within the unlisted space of thematic. Sushi uses our investments to finance renovation, put in LED lighting and stuff like that into companies and within the public sector. So it helps our SDG on our philanthropic side, but on the investment side, when the cost savings kicks in from the energy efficiency, we get a share of the profit. So we are helping the philanthropic side as well as harvesting more on returns. So the summing up from my side on the investment strategy and our big changes is that we have a longer time horizons because we don't have Peter anymore, and because it aligns better with our strategy goals. ESG investing and responsibility is something you should do just because of investments. It's not only the right thing to do, but it is an investment discipline. And finally, when we on one hand can support our philanthropic goals and on the other hand create a decent return, we create what we call mission-related investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And Kenneth, yeah, stay up here, and then please, I will invite Elisabeth and Giselle back up here together with Jesper from Realdania as well, and we'll reshuffle a bit here and just have a few remarks on, sharing some info here. Yes, you go to Kenneth. We'll have the Realdania table here, and I don't know, the real world out here.
Not too close.
And maybe we should go back to your slide, Elisabeth, with that's going to be because that was a good one to have as a background. I'm looking up on the sound chief. If I have to move, you just let me know, right? No, that's okay. So, 5% of the Realdania asset now allocated towards MRI. And if it's such a good idea, the first question, of course, has to be, why only 5%?
Yeah, I guess we had a long learning journey, traveling to the US, meeting, among others, the two of you. And one of the learning was that you need to crawl before you can walk, and you need to walk before you can run. And we have really taken that into our strategy. And as Jesper alluded to in the beginning, we do have some experience within the association, and we want to be very cautious when we go this way. But 5% of our portfolio, it's $1 billion Danish. It is quite a lot. Mm.
And just maybe a few words on, of course, except for the fact that you're not having Peter around, what would you say is the main obstacle for Realdania to succeed in making I see that you expect the market-adjusted return on it as well. What would be the main obstacle, you think?
I think that the main obstacle would be on the sourcing side. And that's one of the reasons we have events like this. We want to talk as much about our mission-related investments as possible, because we need a lot of idea to kind of take some of them away and pick the right ones. If you only see some very few things, you kind of get forced and incentivized to do one of those, and that will become bad investment. So we need to increase the sourcing channels as much as possible. Mm.
So, Elisabeth, now I will turn to you, because this is you 6 years ago. So now the wise and experienced Elisabeth can talk to the young and not so clever Elisabeth. And what will you tell Realdania in this position that they are in now? They've started January 1st, 5% mission-related investments, what not to do and what to do.
Oh dear. I absolutely agree with you that crawling before you walk is the right strategy. There's a lot of stories about people with enthusiasm in state institutions that end up kind of killing their opportunities for the next decade because they tried to be too ambitious or too fast. I do think that one of the reasons we like using an outside advisor, Imprint Capital at Goldman Sachs, is because their pipeline is so much bigger. They see apps, they see so much more than our staff can ever see about what's out there, which gives them a quicker, faster ability to say yes, no. So I think I would suggest having someone help you so that you're looking more at the top 20% of ideas rather than all the ideas.
All right. So Jesper, you've been sitting here on first row listening to all the clever inputs coming from up here. And what would be your key takeaways today from Giselle and Elisabeth?
I think what I have learned today, and I'm glad for that, that is we are on the right path. I mean, doing this is right, and not doing this is wrong. So this is a path and a journey we have to get on. And I think in answering for the 5%, I think the combination of 5% specific to MRI related to Realdania's mission, combined with a very ambitious step up on ESG, these two things together, I think it would be a little risky to call that unambitious, because I hope that this is the right track and that we can do that and still keep a sufficient return of our investment, so we also can do the grant making. So I mean, and also be here for the next generation. So I think there's a lot of agendas to take care on, and I think you have given us a lot of very good inspiration to that.
And how much room for disappointment do you have in Realdania on these decisions? And maybe that should be directed to the board. I don't know, but you probably discussed it beforehand, because you also say this is also a matter of conscience. It's about doing the right thing, but it's also about money in the end. You need the return to do to give your grants and do the work you do on livable cities, sustainable cities, etc. So how much room do you have to be disappointed within these 5% allocation? Kenneth, maybe that's...
Yeah, I think it's a fairly easy question, actually, because we have the same obligation as towards mission-related investment as we have on other investments. We need the same risk characteristics and we need the same returns on the risk taken. Mm-hmm. So it's actually the same obstacles we meet on original investments as in on mission-related investments.
Okay. Yes,
yeah, and one of the things we learned visiting American foundations and institutions was very clear: you have to crawl before you can walk, and you have to leave this in the Department of Investment instead of in the Department of Philanthropy if you want to have these two agendas equalized. So our mandate is extremely clear. We have to get the same return as for the rest of investment, and we have to do good. So that's the task, and we have to do that. And I'm sure we can do it, because all the examples shows this is possible.
Yeah. Setting expectations in your own stakeholder group is so important. I think that in some foundations, you know, all of a sudden the staff doesn't want to see anything they don't like. And our staff, because there's a whole learning agenda, they're actually engaged in what's there and what isn't, and they understand why we're investing in things and why we say no to things. So I think part of it is also there's just a more broader education about how investing works with your stakeholders, so they can kind of support you, rather than, I think a lot of CIOs are worried that you step onto this path and it's just a nightmare. And we've found actually the opposite, that they have much deeper understanding about what our goals are as investors than they did before.
Giselle, from your Investors Council within the GIIN, now of course Realdania is a member, a rather new member, and now they're stepping on to also allocating a part of the portfolio towards mission-related investments. What would be your best advice based on what you've met from investors stepping into this?
Well, I think we have the actual investor here providing the advice, but I think what I find incredibly inspiring, especially from a perspective of foundation, and why many, like Realdania, are stepping into the space, is we've been talking about, it's a no-brainer. This gives you just another tool in the toolkit to advance the mission and the goal. And in this case, I absolutely agree with Jesper that this is investment. And you know, the reason the GIIN was originally founded a decade ago is really out of this belief and vision that if investments can prove to be a powerful and sustainable complement to philanthropy and aid to address the issues and allow investors to generate a return, why not do this? It's not going to be easy. And that's why many of us here are sharing the learnings. But I just think it is inspiring and important for those Realdania and also McKnight that have really taken that lead of the leadership and the commitment. And I encourage all of you in this audience to do so, whether you're in a foundation or an institutional asset owner and everything in between. So I think it is, and I also agree, let's just do it. Let's not, really not let perfect be the enemy of the good. You have to start and learn and iterate. So I appreciate also what Elisabeth shared in her comments.
So just maybe rounding up, I would like to ask all four of you, because at some point, the two roads will cross. We hear about changes of the financial models. We have to behave differently, the role of model, blah, 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 sorry. And you're telling me we will do this, but the demand is clear. It shall give us the adjusted market return, otherwise we're not going to do it. It will happen. It will cross. One of you will not be happy, right? You will not get the return, and the system will not change. Maybe it will. Maybe it will not. If we meet that crossroad, which path to take? Do you have a responsibility to also invest money without giving the return you want in order to make the change that are so asked for? And I think it's a question for you all. Everybody, actually.
I don't think it's black and white. I think it is a spectrum. And that's why, for those investors in the room, ask yourself, what is your motivation? What is important to you? If it is important for risk mitigation, you take a certain approach. And if you are like the foundations on the stage, you really want to use the investment dollars to invest in solutions and positive impact. I don't think it is a black and white approach. And I like to think that it's actually two-lane merging versus crossing.
I love the merging image because that's very much what's happened in our investment team. I was hired to take care of 10% of the portfolio. I had some access to the analyst and the other staff. Now, a few years later, it's one team, it's one integrated approach. Not everything everything has impact in our portfolio. I want to be clear. It's not like no impact and then good impact. It's actually all impact, and where are we paying attention? So I think in the future, we are going to pay more attention and try to quantify and understand the negative impacts. Things that have been costs and impacts that have been externalized will become more part of company costs. And in that case, you're going to get equalization. So I actually don't like impact investing being only about good. I think all investing is impact.
Yeah, I think it's more complex than just two roads crossing each other, because I think there's a lot of extra bottom lines here. Some of you said that this is complicated with staff. I think, I would say 90% of the people involved in our process, and even the two head of the process, the CIOs, has been extremely driven by wanting this. This has not been forced from a board to a CEO, to a CIO. This has been a process which has been so natural for us because it's making the world better. It's creating a return which is sufficient. And at the same time, it's creating our business and our way of being an organization, attracting staff and everything much better. I love your way of having three bottom lines with the learning thing, because I can see that our people working with investment get more knowledge about our grant making, and our grant making people get new perspectives. So this is there's a lot of bottom lines in this, which makes this so important. And I'm sure Realdania in 5 years will be better to what we are doing, both investing and grant making, because of this journey we are on right now.
First of all, I said it in my presentation. We absolutely believe that ESG, responsible investing, and impact investing is an investment discipline. Learning about the future industries, what will kind of change industries, what will be the risk of companies, and all those things building into our investment, that can only be a good idea from my standpoint. And if we come to the situation where we have the crossroad, I would say it's not that big of a problem, because then it's just our Nina, not you, but our Nina delivering the money out in philanthropy. And that's a decision for our board, not really for investments.
That be the final word. Thank you, Giselle. Thank you, Elisabeth. And thank you, Kenneth. We will leave the floor now to our host, Jesper, to make the closing remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And Nina, couldn't you just stay here? We just have a little present for you. Thank you so much. And not only for making this very professionally facilitated and very intelligent run, but also keeping time, which you're used to do every evening. So, and I just have a little gift for you, a book about this building and some of the things that we are doing in the building. And so thank you. Shouldn't we give her a big hand? And then could you have the two American ladies, Elisabeth and Giselle, to just come up here as well? Thank you so much for taking the time to travel to cold Denmark and normally very rainy Denmark. It has stopped while you arrived. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's been just what we wanted, to have this element of international knowledge to help us and to share with some of our stakeholders some of the experiences we have learned from you and your very more concrete things. I'm sure that the input has been usable for everybody. I think it will be a great basis for people to step on. We had a little thing this morning, and are people just wondering about this? Are people working with this? Are people completely into this? And it doesn't matter where you are on that scale. This has been a true inspiration for all of us. So thank you so much for taking your time here. And afterwards, we will have this little networking thing. And British foundations, they always say that if you have met one foundation, you have met one foundation. That says a lot about our sector, because we are very individual. But afterwards, you will have the opportunity to talk to more than Realdania, both other parties and foundations, but also a lot of foundations. And we just have a little gift for you as well. It's some different things, and it's some Danish design, which you can bring back home. It's corona-free for sure. And then it's about this building, which is not Danish design because it's Dutch design, and we like it. Not everybody likes it, but if you like it, we have created this city in a box, which is this building you can recreate as a 3D puzzle in wooden bricks. So you can do that if you get bored on the way back. And then a little book in English about this building for both of you. So please give them a big round of applause and say thank you so much. And then I will switch to Danish og sige tusind tak til jer alle sammen for at komme og bruge en fredag eftermiddag sammen med os. Det er vi rigtig glade for. På jeres stole ligger der en billet, og hvis I ikke har en ved siden af, så ligger der også en billet der. Det er en billet til Dansk Arkitekturcenter. Lige nu er der en udstilling her i BLOX, er jo bygget af to grunde. Den ene grund er at skabe nogle fantastiske rammer til Dansk Arkitekturcenter. Lige nu er der en udstilling, der hedder Kids City, om byer, arkitekturs betydning i børnehøjde. Og børn kommer ind gratis, men det gør I jo ikke. Så her er en billet, så I kan komme ind med børn eller børnebørn. Hvis der ikke sidder nogen ved siden af, så kan I også få partneren med. Ellers må I betale for partneren, og I er velkommen til at komme tilbage rigtig mange gange i Dansk Arkitekturcenter og være med til arkitekturformidling. Vi håber, I bliver glade for det. Så bliver der jo mulighed her bagefter til at snakke og netværke, og jeg vil bare gerne benytte den her anledning til og sige en varm velkommen til dig, Kenneth. Vi glæder os rigtig meget til samarbejdet. Du har jo været her i snart 3 uger. Vi har haft en meget, meget grundig proces. Vi er rigtig glade for det og glæder os rigtig meget til det. Og til dig, Peter, vil jeg sige tak for 5 fantastiske år her sammen i Realdania. et fantastisk samarbejde, et super kollegaskab, en evne til at sætte barren højt, store ambitioner. Du har lavet en kæmpe indsats, du har gjort det godt, vi har haft det sjovt. Og alle de ting her vil jeg bare sige til dig, Kenneth. Sådan håber jeg også, at jeg en eller anden dag kan sige til dig, eller du er her længere end mig måske, men at det bliver på samme måde. Godt samarbejde, godt kollegaskab, sæt barren højt. Peter, jeg vil bare sige noget af det, som er rigtigt, det her med at være enormt ordentlig, det her med at være enormt omhyggelig, og det her med at kunne tænke ud over bare investering, og bare investering må ikke misforstå, fordi investering er jo hele forudsætningen for det, vi er sat i verden for at kunne dele penge ud. Men det her med også at interessere sig for hele butikken og være en af 3 direktører i hele Realdania, det har du gjort fabelagtigt. Så tusind tak for samarbejdet til dig. Velkommen ombord til Kenneth. Nu er der mulighed for at gå ud og drikke et glas vin, og uanset om I er enige i mine roser til dem begge to, så kan I jo sige pænt goddag og pænt farvel. Så tak til jer alle sammen for at komme, og tak til jer to for at være her.